Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into a really critical concept, especially for anyone in public administration or even just thinking about it, that complex, often tricky relationship between law and ethics. Here's what we've got lined up. We're going to start with a real-world dilemma that officials face. Then we'll define what we're actually talking about, law versus ethics. We'll compare them, explore those messy gray areas where they clash, and then find a guiding principle to help make sense of it all. And we'll wrap up with the single most important takeaway.
All right, let's dive right in. Instead of starting with some boring textbook definition, let's start with a problem, a real conflict that public servant can face pretty much any day on the job.
So picture this. You have a clear rule that says you have to evict people living on the pavement. That's the law. But your compassion, your sense of what's right, tells you these people need help, not to be thrown out on the street. This isn't just a hypothetical question. It's a real-world clash between what we call procedural integrity, just following the rules, and substantive justice, which is all about doing what's fundamentally fair.
And you know what? The Supreme Court actually tackled this exact issue in a famous case, Olga Tellez versus the Bombay Municipal Corporation. Their ruling was groundbreaking. They said that even if the eviction was technically legal, doing it without providing an alternative violated the fundamental right to livelihood. It's such a powerful reminder. Just because you can do something legally doesn't automatically make it right or just.
So to even begin to navigate these tricky situations, we have to get super clear on what we mean by law and what we mean by ethics, because believe me, they are not the same thing.
Okay, so first up, law. Think of law as the official external rulebook for society. It's the must-do. These are the traffic laws, the criminal codes, the administrative procedures. They're written down, they're enforced by the police and courts, and if you break them, there are very clear, very real consequences. Ethics, on the other hand, well, that's your internal compass. It's not about what you must do, it's about what you ought to do. It's driven by your conscience, by values like fairness, honesty, and empathy, especially when no one is looking over your shoulder.
All right, now for the fun part. Let's put these two ideas side by side. When you see them in a direct comparison like this, the differences really pop.
This chart just lays it out so perfectly, doesn't it? Law comes from the outside, from government, and it's rigid. It's enforced by the state. It tells you what you can't do. Ethics, well, that comes from the inside, from our values and conscience. It's flexible, and it's about what you feel you shouldn't do.
But of course, life is rarely that black and white, right? The really tough calls, the dilemmas that keep public servants up at night, they almost always live in the gray areas where law and ethics crash into each other.
Let's talk about the first classic scenario, where an action is totally 100% legal, but it just feels wrong. It follows the letter of the law, but completely tramples on its spirit. I mean, think about using a loophole to avoid taxes. It might be legal, but is it ethical? Or what about laws that, in retrospect, were deeply unethical, like Section 377? These examples really drive home a critical point. Legality is just the baseline. It's the absolute floor for behavior. It's not the ceiling.
And then you've got the complete flip side of that coin. This is when a deeply held moral belief actually pushes someone to break a law because they see the law itself as unjust.
The perfect example, of course, is Mahatma Gandhi's Salt Satyagraha. Breaking the salt tax law was, by definition, an illegal act, but it was also a profoundly ethical one. It was a protest against an unjust system. And it just goes to show you, sometimes the most ethical thing you can do is to challenge the law itself.
So, what do if you're that civil servant, caught between a rigid rule and a genuine, compassionate, ethical impulse? Where do you turn? What's your North Star? Well, thankfully, the answer is right there in the foundational document of our entire nation. Is this idea called constitutional morality. And the key here is that it's not just about following the literal words written in the Constitution. It's about living up to its spirit. Those huge, powerful values of justice, liberty, and equality that are the very soul of the document.
And Dr. Ambedkar himself said it best. This isn't something we're born with. He said it's a value that has to be actively cultivated, something we have to learn and practice, especially if you're in public service.
This idea of constitutional morality basically gives an officer permission to pause and ask a really important question. Okay, this action I'm about to take might be technically legal, but does it truly honor the promise of justice and dignity that's at the heart of our Constitution? And that question brings us right to the heart of it all. The big idea I hope you take away from our discussion today.
At the end of the day, just following the rules isn't enough. Not if you want governance that is both effective and, importantly, humane. You can think of it like this. The law provides the steel frame of administration. It's the structure. But ethics, guided by constitutional morality, that's the compass. It's what gives you the direction to make sure that the structure is actually serving the people.
This quote from Justice Potter Stewart just nails it, doesn't it? Ethics is knowing the difference between what you have a right to do and what is right to do. And that leaves all of us with a pretty powerful question to think about. Are we just following the rules, or are we really striving to do what's right?